Hey, so there's a shadow cyber war shadowing this Israeli-Iranian conflict. We're going to talk about it. You're watching TechStrong Gang. Hey everyone, happy Thursday and welcome to TechStrong Gang. We've got a great show lined up for you. We've got some important things we want to talk about today, and we've got some important people to talk about it with. Let me introduce you to our gang lineup for today. First of all, I'm happy to introduce someone making his debut on our TechStrong Gang, but he's no stranger if you've been in the world of cyber and DevOps and DevSecOps. I've known the man for a long time and thrilled to have him on here. Let me introduce you to John Morello. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Alan, good to see you again, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure. John, since it's your first time on, give people a little, beyond what I said, give them a little bit of who John Morello is.
Sure. So, like you said, I've been doing this cyber stuff for, I guess, 25 years at this point, going back to many years at Microsoft in the early 2000s. Then probably we're best known for the company we had in 2015, Twistlock, that kind of started the whole container security world. And we sold Twistlock to Palo in 2019. And we have a company now, Minimus, that basically helps organizations reduce the risks in their containerized environments by giving them purposeful built images that reduce the number of vulnerabilities by 95 to 98%. So really dramatic changes in like their risk posture. So you can see more of that and try them out at Minimus.io, but appreciate you having us on, Al.
Absolutely. I interviewed Minimus. Great product there. John, you're usually CTO. Are you CTO at Minimus? Is that?
I am, yeah. We all have our little roles that we play.
No, that's your lane, baby.
Team is the VP of R&D, same as usual. Yep.
Good for you. All right, moving on from John, we have another resident cyber expert we're thrilled to have on. She writes at Security Boulevard as well as just really well known in the cyber media world. Our friend Terri Robinson. Hey, Terri, how are you?
Good. How are you doing this morning?
I'm happy to be here and glad to have you on. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, our Silicon Valley man on the scene, John Swartz. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Very
Great to be here. I'm looking forward to the show.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And now we'll go, well, there's no joy in Harrisonville today. The mighty Yankees have struck out again. Is it about 30 innings without a run now, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's some sort of contagious disease that's got the whole offense suffering.
4-0. Coming off a 1-0, a 2-0. It's kind of disgusting. Let me just say that down here in Florida land, we're real happy to be celebrating our hometown Panthers winning a Stanley Cup, the second in a row. Let me just, for the record, I'm a New York Rangers fan. But look, I live down here. You got to give the boys credit. 2 Stanley Cups in a row is not bad, so go Panthers.
It's the friggin' middle of June and we're playing hockey. How silly is that?
It's South Florida and we're playing hockey. It's silly to begin with, but what do you want? Anyway, let's get into our show real quick here, right? So, Mike, as I said, I teased in the opening, there's a shadow cyber war kind of ghosting or following the hot war between Israel and Iran. What do we got?
Yeah, Terry has a story about the hacktivist part of this equation, but there's also cyber espionage and all kinds of attacks on critical infrastructure. And Terry, I guess, has this just kind of emerged as a new front that needs to be battled in the same way we have war at sea and war in the air and war in the ground? There's war in cyber.
So no sooner had Israel launched its strikes against the, Iran nuclear infrastructure than the cyber theater opened up, right? And I think that to no one's surprise that happens. I think that, of course, we need to start treating that like its own theater and have the defenses shored up before the stuff even gets started. Radware was the one that first observed sort of an uptick in activity and Telegram channels. And they're from the actors that are sympathetic to Iran. Um, and but this battle in cyber with these two countries is not new. You go all the way back to Stuxnet. When was that? 2010, when the Stuxnet worm was deployed to hobble the centrifuges critical to Iran's nuclear program, and then DDoS attacks just a decade ago on U.S. financial institutions. So, in early indications, there were claims by the Arabian Ghost that Israeli radio stations had been shut down. I think the one that it sort of concerned me and made me wonder why their defenses weren't shored up is that the Mossad website was shuttered. So I'm not sure why these things haven't been more protected. In addition to sort of this disruption and some of the damage that they can do, there's a huge disinformation campaign already underway. And as we know, the disinformation campaigns are extremely dangerous these days. So,
John Morello, is the cybersecurity community watching this closely? Because there's things to be learned here. There's new tactics and techniques, and this will become something of an example that we cite for many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, anytime you have a major geopolitical event like this and there's cyber response and cyber acts that are occurring as part of it, there's always an opportunity to learn, just as there is on the, kinetic battlefield. I mean, I think one of the things that's been most amazing in these conflicts in both Iran and in Ukraine in the past just few weeks has been the use of drones as a way to really asymmetrically do things that historically would have required substantially more risk, substantially more military hardware and planning and so forth. But I mean, the notion that, like, for example, with Ukraine being able to disable a third, depending on the numbers that you believe, disable or destroy a third of Russia's strategic aircraft, and with Israel potentially destroying substantial amounts of ballistic missiles on the ground using drones, and the fact that those drones were not launched from the territory of the attacker, but rather were launched from within the territory of the attacked, I think is a really amazing thing, and frankly, something that concerns me a lot as an American. I mean, if you think about just having like the free society that we do in the U.S., where it's relatively easy to travel around, it's relatively easy to, to import materials, it's relatively easy to buy properties. You can even easily imagine adversaries, purchasing properties, close to American military bases and spending years developing facilities and capabilities for drones and be able to do things in the U.S. homeland that historically, the oceans had basically shielded us from. So I think there's a lot to learn from the cyber standpoint. I think one of the things that's been interesting to me with it is there has been less obvious actions on the cyber side, which I don't think implies that there have been less actions, maybe just less things that have been visible. I think what we don't know is maybe all those things that have occurred, that have not yet made it into reporting, like what Terri's done, or not yet made it into the historical records that we'll find out years hence from now, which probably were involved in Israel having such, exquisite intelligence about the locations of Iranian leadership. There's a good chance cyber had a role in that. And there's really no telling what else cyber is doing to be able to inform Israeli war planning around the location of ballistic missiles, the status of the Iranian nuclear program, and other activities that directly result in actual like kinetic decisions about how they go to battle. So I think Terri's reporting is really interesting, but I think there's probably a lot more that we'll all learn in the coming years that's going to reveal more about how cyber was so instrumental.
I think that blend of cyber and kinetic is going to be something to, to watch going forward. I honestly believe that they're codependent at this point, and they're working in tandem. Yeah. So I think it will be interesting to see what kinds of actions emerge later on. Hopefully we find out about them sooner rather than later. But
I tend to think it'll take a while. But let's be clear. John, you mentioned the Ukrainian conflict. The fact of the matter is, we've seen the cyber theater play a role. I guess the first time I saw it that I remember was when Russia was going after the Republic of Georgia, right? They took out, they kind of instigated a coup and took out the president, Shakiavelli or whatever his name was. They shut down Georgia's internet, basically. They also did it, I think, in Chechnya when they had an uprising there. So Russia's been a leader in this a while. But I think in every conflict we're seeing cyber plays a role. And there's offensive and defensive aspects of it. John, you mentioned intelligence gathering. I'm sure they had Find My iPhones on some of these Iranian leaders, It's crazy when you think about it, and then when you look, though, at the two combatants here, you look at Iran, you look at Israel. Yes, there are Iranian hacktivists that are funded by Iran. And, they're not slouches. They're not slouches. I don't think if they didn't take down the Mossad site unless the Mossad site wanted to be taken down, because Israel had the advantage of surprise here. They knew what they were doing, so they probably had a chance to shore up before the attack. On the other side, you're talking about Israel, the people behind Unit 8200 or whatever, 8600. Talking about the people who have invented a lot of offensive cybersecurity. Though let's not think that the NSA are choir boys. They're not, right? Probably the U.S. is as guilty as anyone or as thick into this as anyone else.
I hope so, as an American citizen.
Yeah,
I hope that's the case.
I mean, everything I've always learned, and, having also been John in cyber 25, 30 years and sold to a lot of the agencies over the years before I got into this, the NSA is still probably the premier outfit in the world, right? And but the Israelis are no slouch. Hence the whole Israeli cybersecurity industry. So you've got to assume that they've been doing offensive and defensive type of operations that are, thick and full there. But let me put my bow around all of this. Modern warfare is cyber warfare. Women's rights are human rights. Modern warfare is cyber warfare too. And any combatant who doesn't put that into their mix is seeding out some really big territory.
I suspect this has already gone global too, right? Because you got to figure that Russia and North Korea are helping Iran, and the NSA here is probably helping out Israel, and so I don't think the physical conflict.
I don't know, Mike. I don't know, because you know what? If you're Russia, and you could see it by Russia's public actions as well, you may not want to get that involved in this. We're certainly not leaving any fingerprints.
No, but
I'll also bring up another point that I think is really probably very directly relevant to the IT backgrounds that I think all of us had, and probably a lot of the audience has with it too. Is we talk a lot about supply chain security and software supply chain security. You can see kind of the physical manifestation of that in at least a cyber adjacent way with what Israel did with Hezbollah and the pagers and the VHF radios, which was honestly like an incredible operation. I mean, just
the
like
stuff
something
of
from
movies.
Truly.
Yeah.
But it also really makes, as somebody who's very much into the industry, our whole business is about, providing customers with secure software images that include all this open source stuff. One of the things that I think about often with this, and that there's not really easy answers to, is there are so many individual open source packages, libraries, projects, whatever you want to refer to them as, that are fundamental to everybody's usage of the modern internet infrastructure as we know it. And many of those projects are not things that are common sort of household or industry names. If I said Nginx, everybody knows that, everybody's used that and so forth, but there's probably, a few dozen individual tiny little components that go into making an Nginx build work that are much lesser known projects that might be maintained by, one or just a small number of people that don't really have very much name recognition at all. And, you saw, I believe it was maybe a year or so ago with an example of, what I believe was likely some nation state actor trying to compromise a compression library that was widely used in a very I think very skillful way that was not like an obvious kind of compromise, that they were trying to poison that supply chain very far upstream so that it could emanate down into lots of other applications that use that. One of the things that really concerns me is our ability as frankly, as a society, I would say, that we're both reliant completely in our just normal operation of all these systems that everybody uses, that are frankly maintained as almost like hobbyist things in the open source. And it's very difficult to know in many cases, are the people that contribute updates to those things, are they doing so in a good faith manner to improve that? Or, are they potentially working for some kind of nation state or just motivated, kind of hacktivist sort of actor there to do something to poison it? And, so far we haven't seen tremendous amounts of examples of that occurring, other than like the one that I mentioned and probably a few others. But I also always wonder if you really got into a situation where a major player in this, a Russia, China, United States, for example, felt really existentially threatened, what other cyber weapons would come out that we don't know about yet, that are out there that would be very difficult for organizations to defend against because they already were running that stuff inside their environments. And like I said, there's no easy answers to that, but it's something that, being in this space, being very intimate in this space, is something that really I think about a lot and concerns me a lot, because there's not easy answers for how do we reap the benefits of this kind of open source ecosystem while still being able to protect against that kind of threat.
With this asymmetrical warfare, there's like a sidebar going on that's kind of interesting to me that applies to Silicon Valley and the Beltway. And there's this emergence of AI and these AI contracts that are being awarded by the federal government for cyber defense purposes. So Monday, OpenAI has something called the OpenAI for Government Initiative, and they got their first big contract from the Pentagon on Monday. It was 1 year, $200 million. So their AI tools are going to be used for proactive cyber defense. They also have a partnership with Anduril to improve our defense systems. And it's interesting too that we have yet another partnership between Anthropic, AWS, and Palantir to provide Claude models to intelligence defense agencies. So you're starting to see these companies, and for OpenAI, they really want to concentrate as much on government contracts as the consumer side. And so we're starting to see that development of that angle as well. And it's going to be lucrative, and it's gaining a lot of attention and a lot of interest from AI companies.
It's going to get scary because the bad guys are using LLMs to take a vulnerability and create an exploit in a matter of minutes, and the attacks are going to be essentially in real time. And we're not really set up to do that kind of defense. So, maybe Amazon is, but most companies are still running around, trying to manually update firewall rules, and it's just going to be crazy.
Let me bring it back to the Iranian-Israeli conflict. There's a difference between sympathetic hacktivist and the state itself. And the hacktivists are nice, but it kind of sounds like Matthew Broderick to me. Let's play thermonuclear war versus trained professional cyber warfare, cyber soldiers. And I think the results you're seeing in the field probably point to the difference between them. Defacing the website. I mean, we're hearing reports that the internet in Iran is very much on and off. Now, is that the Iranian government shutting it down so that people don't, shutting down dissent, perhaps, or shutting down, information that could lead to Israel and used for targeting and so forth? Or is it the Israelis shutting down the internet to affect Iranian communications? A little of both,
Perhaps,
maybe.
I guess that points to another problem. It's kind of like the democratization of of cyber warfare, for lack of a better term, has certainly made that a more complicated picture, hasn't it? Like, who's doing what to whom? Is the government?
Yeah, you don't know who the good guys, the bad guys, and what the good guys consider good and what the bad guys consider bad. It's all cyber to me. Anyway, hey, let's take a break. We've kind of gone overtime on this one. We're going to come back and let's talk about MCPs and DevOps. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
Hey, folks, we're back. And as Alan alluded, we're going to shift gears a little bit, maybe something quite not as serious, but definitely important and profound. There's this thing called the Model Context Protocol created by Anthropic, and it basically provides a bi-directional link for AI agents to communicate and access data. And now we're starting to see this in DevOps. New Relic and CloudBees are both at the forefront of kind of putting together early previews of this. But Alan, we've been around this block for a long time. I think I'm going to see like every vendor on the planet is suddenly going to have an MCP server.
You know, Mike, it's funny. You're not kidding. I think I've already, in this week alone, I've probably done 4 interviews around companies rolling MCPs, not counting New Relic and CloudBees. But what does it point to, right? It points to everybody wants to cash in or at least be perceived as riding the agentic AI wave. And, what does it really mean? And I have this problem. Where do we draw the line between agents and APIs? Right? Or do agents now manipulate APIs or master APIs or use APIs? I don't know. But certainly Here's an interesting thing. Anthropic floated this MCP protocol, right? And it has become the de facto standard now for agents talking to agents. And that's why everyone's building a MCP into their platform. Now, I see it a lot with the observability players for sure, right? And then so New Relic to me was, with all due respect, a little bit of a me too. I think CloudBees is out ahead. I haven't seen GitLab and maybe so, though I think JFrog has MCP in their stuff. But certainly all of the DevOps players are going to have MCP availability because we spoke in cyber about the cyber story. We were talking about software supply chains and stuff. That's what DevOps is focused on now, the software supply chain, the CI/CD pipeline. And you're gonna have agents and APIs throughout this, and you need that. If MCP is the lingua franca of this, you need to have that built in.
There is this debate about what exactly MCP is, because some people would say it's a variation of an API written in JSON, and and that's what makes it accessible. Other folks say it's something that sits between an API and a full boat connector, and it provides that level of integration. But John Morello, are these going to be like big, fat, new, rich targets for cyber attacks? Because it seems like that would be the first place to go if I was a bad guy.
Well, I mean, I think attackers like always naturally follow like the places where there is the most uncertainty and chaos and churn in organizations, because usually those are the things that are least understood and most susceptible and most frequently changing. And so because of that, there's more opportunities, to find potential weaknesses and vulnerabilities in that. I do think it's interesting in this space that you see almost every new major wave of technology kind of following similar adoption characteristics. And I think about like this very akin to when containers really started coming out in, the mid 2010s, and people started using them, and everybody, was using Docker, and there was a few other like management frameworks that were like a big deal at the time. You had, DCOS, and you had Docker Swarm, and you had Kubernetes and so forth. But usually in these things, the industry sort of on its own, just as a, free market evolutionary path, tends to converge around one set of standards for manageability when you've got all these kind of like diversity of implementations. Obviously in the container world, it's been Kubernetes. MCP seems to be that around how do you programmatically connect applications to models. But I think the thing that's really interesting about this from a cyber standpoint is everybody, to Alan's point, has rushed to say like, oh, we have an MCP too, right? How high quality that's been done, how rigorous that's, it's been, really threat modeled and tested and thoughtfully built and so forth. I think it'd be wise for people to have some skepticism about that, because to build something that's potentially so complex and sophisticated and enables access to data and resources that are not just complex and high value and sophisticated, but actually can take actions, on their behalf, is kind of a different level of threat than we've really seen before. Like if you think about the securing technology really up until the prevalence of all these AI capabilities that have really become mainstream over the past couple of years, you were typically saying like, I want to protect access to my data or to computing resources that if an attacker took control of them, they would still have to manipulate and, run commands from them and basically act as though they were the owner of that resource, but it was the attacker that was telling the compromised resource what to do. Maybe that to exfiltrate data or to be used as a node in some sort of DOS attack or whatever. You have for the first time now, though, something I think is really interesting and that none of us really fully understand at this point, which is you can have attackers compromise that MCP layer and potentially through that access layer, be able to interact with models that can take unknown actions on their behalf. Of course, if they give it a sufficiently detailed and focused prompt, they can control that a lot, but you don't really necessarily know what it's going to do, not in nearly as a deterministic manner as you did in the past. And so I think for everybody in this industry, it's a whole new world of potential risks and threats and scenarios to consider. And frankly, I don't think anybody has really an answer for it because we haven't seen enough of it in reality to know, like, what does that mean? What are some of the things that people are going to exploit with it? But it's certainly an area that, that's going to be very interesting to see how it develops over the next few years, because like I say, it's really the first time I think that a cyber risk could expose potentially open-ended, unknown potential downstream effects beyond what even the attacker themselves intends to do.
Mm-hmm. Terri Robinson, how many days or weeks away are we from the great MCP server misconfiguration
That's what
crisis?
I was actually just thinking about. I'd say minutes, Mike. It creates greater potential for misconfigurations. That's a particular sore spot for me. I don't want to say sore spot, but I get annoyed every time I have to write about a misconfiguration. But I think probably what John says, aggravates that, right? That sort of rush to market or rush to, get these things out there, and then that just makes the possibility of misconfigurations that much higher and that much quicker. I say minutes. I say it's happening as we speak right now.
Let me throw something else out at the panel and take your thoughts on this. Are we rushing MCP? Right? Everybody's talking about agents. Everybody, we're all going to have all of these agents. I've got Agent 86, 99, 07, 007, all of these agents. And we're building these MCPs to handle all of these agents. But are we building like a lot of dark fiber like Level 3 did in 2001 when the internet boom kind of had died down and we overbuilt capacity? When are we really going to use these MCPs? When are these agents going mainstream? I know everybody, and that may sound, what's the word, treasonous in today's tech world. right? Because we're all about the agents.
Actually, Alan, I very much uh, agree with you, and from the standpoint of like, I think it's good to have a bit of a reality check and some skepticism on it. I can tell you, it's just being like in the venture-backed world for the past decade now, the amount of hype and noise that surrounds anything related to AI today is kind of overwhelming, and you know the money is flowing to kind of for you to get any of the money that flows through that VC machine, you have to have some kind of story around AI. I think all of us have used various AIs, particularly like LLM type of implementations, in our daily lives and work lives and so forth. There's amazing stuff that they can do. I mean, like I'm not at all downplaying the capabilities of it, but I think that there's also a lot of sort of breathless uh, talk that's probably not really realistic today. You hear, I think the Anthropic CEO had some quote the other day that AI was going to result in like 80% unemployment in 2 years or something like that. There's aspects of this
Yeah,
that,
he
that
said, he basically, John, basically he said whether it was like half the white collar jobs are going to be lost within 2 to 5 years. But then the caveat always is that they're fundraising right now. So I think he's
yes,
throwing out as much fear as possible, right? And it worked.
exactly. Well, I just think, like, to me at least, I think a lot back to like the very late '90s, early 2000s with the internet itself, where like there was similar predictions, like everything was going to change and so forth, and obviously, like it did. It's like a fundamental innovation in human society. And I think AI is the same thing, but like the idea that that's all going to happen like in the next 2 years, and that like everything just kind of like magically gets solved, and I think it's probably unrealistic. I think much like the internet, you'll see like 10 years
There'll
from
be a
now, 5
shakeout.
years from now, even. Yeah,
Look,
exactly.
I
And there'll be
remember
things
in
where
those
it's found it's really
.com,
good.
John, and you were around then. John, both Johns were around. Terry, Mike, you were too, right? In those .com days, you'd put together a PowerPoint of a business model, and you would claim in the PowerPoint that your present value was $70 million, and you're looking to do a post raise at 100. You've got no revenue, a business plan, and you lose 10 cents on every dollar you do, but you're going to make it up in volume, right? And that model, internet schminternet, it doesn't work. It's against the laws of physics. And I think there's a lot of that same, what did he call it, Alan Greenspan? Irrational exuberance. Irrational exuberance. There's a lot of that going around here too. And part of that exuberance is, let's get an MCP server in here. We'll see. Anyway, we're overtime on this segment too. It seems we're overtime on every segment. You're watching TechStrong, gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back with our final block, and it's about AMD versus NVIDIA. This has been a battle that's been long brewing, but AMD is now showing some chips or AI chips in actual servers that people can buy. And so the argument is AMD, John Schwartz, has wrapped itself in this open source flag and is saying that, NVIDIA is all about lock-in and they are all about openness. But the question is can AMD really catch NVIDIA? Is NVIDIA just too far ahead? And
Yeah. You read my mind. It's almost to the point now where we're saying, remember AMD? Somewhere that company, that other company, right? So there was all this hoopla around NVIDIA's dominance. There was, where in the world is Jensen Huang? He has a special guest appearance at every conceivable AI event the last 2 years. And then if we're not talking about them, we're talking about the follies at Intel. So somewhere AMD got lost in the shuffle. And it's unfortunate, given this company's reputation, which is incredibly good, I think, in the Valley. It's a universally lauded CEO. And it's kind of avoided this whole political fallout with Trump and kind of maintained its dignity. But they, in a sense, Mike, yes, as you said, they were trying to offer this clear message to differentiate themselves from NVIDIA at their event in San Jose. And they want to present themselves as this leading player in their enterprise AI market and at least be in the conversation. I think that's what they're trying to do. And the way they're trying to do it, I think core to it is this competitive strategy of a focus on open standards and an interoperative approach versus NVIDIA, which is a mix of open source and proprietary approach. So if it sent in some way, and Alan has always said this, he's always driven it home, in every major market, there are like three major players that are going to survive. AMD is going to be fine. They're going to be a distant second to NVIDIA for the foreseeable future. But I laud them and give them major credit for at least trying to differentiate themselves and kind of try to counterbalance this fusillade of just constant NVIDIA news. So the competition is good, and I think we need to have like another choice. NVIDIA kind of scares me in a certain sense too, because they're too powerful for their own good.
I think of AMD as the Jan Brady of chip makers. So the Marsha is NVIDIA.
But you know what? I love the Brady Bunch reference. But if I had to pick a company to play this role, AMD's damn good at it. They played this to Intel for 20 years. And you know what? As we sit here today, they did a damn good job. Right? Intel was, for all intents and purposes, a monopoly. But AMD stayed in the game. They couldn't go toe-to-toe with the Intels, but they stayed in the game. I suspect it'll be a similar thing here, right? And then, look, Q-Day is coming. Q-Day is coming, and who has the quantum chip? And is that guy going to wear a synthetic leather jacket and go to every conference? And
Hey, well, I wouldn't count AMD out for the following reasons. One is they're actually doing quite well in traditional servers, and most of the, at least more than half of the new servers that people are rolling out have AMD processors in there. So they have the chops to fight the fight, and open source it's a classic, tortoise versus the hare kind of thing. Open source has historically been slow off the mark, but eventually wins the race. So I don't know, Alan, if I look at these open source libraries, developers like that, maybe eventually AMD will resonate with those folks.
What I find interesting, though, Mike, is if you listen to Jensen, CUDA and the rest of their software empire is open source, isn't it?
I don't think CUDA is open source, but the people who write it are all NVIDIA people, and NVIDIA has a strong...
I was going to say, I think it's an example of one of those things that's, I kind of refer to as like a quasi open source. I mean, like technically it may be, but to like Mike's point, when it's completely driven by one organization, like all the contributors, the people that actually own, who can do check-ins and so forth, all work for one company, like... I mean, I guess technically it is, but not truly community.
John, how soon we forget, because we're all used to what I call the foundational model of open source now, where you have the Linux Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation, and you have co-opetition among competitors, and we're all kumbaya gathering around the maypole. But before there was a foundational era, there was what I call the Big Brother era of open source, where every open source project was basically owned lock, stock, and barrel by one organization, and they ran it for their own benefit, right? Going back in the security world, Nessus was Tenable, and Snort was SourceFire, and, it was open source, but it was controlled by them. And that was the way open source ran until, and in this Big Brother era of open source, IBM was good at this too. That's
Well, I think the space is a bit different too, because there's such, when you think specifically about what we're talking about now with AMD and NVIDIA, it's not sort of general purpose software that could be run, independently of the underlying hardware
Right.
layer. It's software that is to enable the capabilities of hardware. I
That's
think almost
the key.
definitionally, it's going to be much closer.
You could have open source software, but if it only runs on my proprietary chip,
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
what difference does it make, right? Open source my toe. But like, I think we all would like to see AMD be competitive here. I think, you want to know the truth? I think NVIDIA would like to see AMD be competitive. Because if they're not, then you start using that M word. And the M word gets scary, right?
I'll also say, having just been at Microsoft for a long time during the early 2000s, yeah, honestly, I would tell you, and I think most thoughtful people there would have said, you are better off when you have some competitor who is credible. Like, you don't want to be winning, 50% of the time, but you want to be credible. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps some energy. It makes the market feel like it's something dynamic, where it's not just like, it's just stuff, like it's, I'm just going to buy it and use it until it dies. Like, you really do need that. So, I mean, I think you're right. Like, if they're smart and thoughtful, which I'm sure they are. Clearly, they've made an incredible business. So, I think there's probably, they wouldn't want to admit it publicly, but they probably are happy that there's at least some competition that's out there.
Agreed.
I feel like we're going to have this. I feel like we're going to have this conversation over again. In theory, there should be a framework, kind of like the RISC-V people are talking about, where I have an instruction set that can run on different processors, and that should apply to GPUs, theoretically at least. But the problem I've seen over the years is that developers, for that extra 10 to 15% of performance they might get, are willing to sell their souls for lock-in.
Well, the other thing I'll say too is having, we do use some AI capabilities in our product, and I've certainly worked with a number of companies that are customers that are very focused on either building AI services or really focused on AI enablement of their products. One of the things that I hear consistently from them is just that NVIDIA has really gone the extra mile to make the developer experience excellent. Like the ability to get started, the ease of use, the integration of the tools, that they've really done a very good job with that. So it's not just simply they're here to kind of have a monopoly position to begin with. One of the reasons that they've had that is they've made it as easy as possible for people to build on their hardware by having a great, effectively SDK on top of that. And, again, hopefully AMD is able to replicate that and have an equally good developer experience. But, that experience is what I think you're referring to, Mike, is it's not even necessarily about I want a little bit more performance, but if my job is 20% easier, let's say, by using NVIDIA versus using AMD, I'm probably going to use NVIDIA, right? That's I think what drives a lot of those decisions, because they are fundamental decisions made by the implementers. It's not like there's a corporate strategy in most places where you're going to have, senior management choosing what is the chipset manufacturer that they use. It's going to be done by the people that are building the software. And if that experience is easier on one platform than another, that platform's probably going to win most of the time.
Get your golden handcuffs out, right?
Exactly.
All right. Hey, guys, I think that's going to put a wrap on this episode of TechStrong Gang. Good conversations today. Important stuff we're talking about. Terri, John, and Mike, thanks for joining us on the gang. Thank you for watching this. We hope you appreciate it, whether you're watching it on our TechStrong TV stream in the morning, on demand on techstrong.tv or any of our sites, or a YouTube, TechStrong TV YouTube channel, or check out our OTT channel on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and Roku, as well as iOS and Android. So lots of places to watch this. Don't miss it. Until tomorrow, though, we've got a full TechStrong TV schedule following the gang, so stay tuned right here. But for now, this is Alan Schimmel. We're out.